I never thought the person who would try to take everything from me would be the one I had rocked to sleep for years. I was 69 years old when it started. Not sick, not confused, not ready for anyone to make decisions on my behalf. I still drove myself to the farmer's market every Saturday morning, still kept the books for my little flower shop on Elm Street. Rosewood Blooms. I'd run it for 22 years and still beat my neighbor Carol at Scrabble every Thursday night without breaking a sweat. My mind was sharp. My hands were steady. My life was full. I am Dorothy Hargrove, and this is the story of how my own daughter tried to quietly dismantle everything I had built and how I quietly made sure she couldn't. My husband Richard passed 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and cruel the way that cancer always is. We had 41 years together, and in those 41 years, we built something real, not flashy, not wealthy by anyone's standards, but ours. The house on Birchwood Lane, the flower shop, a savings account we had added to every single month since 1987, even in the lean years, even when we were eating pasta 4 nights a week to do it. When Richard died, I kept going. That surprised some people, I think. They expected me to fall apart. But I had run that shop through a recession, through a flood that took out half of downtown, through Richard's first health scare 10 years before the cancer. Falling apart wasn't something I knew how to do. My daughter, Renee, lived about 40 minutes away with her husband, Patrick. They had a nice house, 2 cars, a boat they took out maybe twice a year. Renee worked in real estate. Patrick was in finance. They weren't struggling, at least, nothing they ever told me suggested they were. I loved my daughter. I want to make that clear before anything else. I loved her the way only a mother can, with the specific tenderness that comes from knowing someone since before they knew themselves. But love doesn't make you blind. Or at least it shouldn't. The first sign was small enough that I almost missed it. About 8 months after Richard passed, Renee started coming by the shop more often. Not to buy flowers. Not really to visit. She would walk around, look at the displays, pick up the old accounting ledger I kept behind the counter, flip through it. She'd ask questions that felt casual but weren't. How much does a shop like this go for, do you think? Or, have you ever thought about what you'd do with the money if you sold? I'd laugh it off. Tell her I wasn't selling. Tell her Rosewood Blooms was as much a part of me as my own name. She'd smile and change the subject. Then, about 2 years ago, the visits started having a different quality. She started bringing Patrick along. They would sit with me at the kitchen table after dinner, and the conversation would always find its way to the same place. My age, my health, the future. What would happen to the shop when the time came? What would happen to the house? I remember one night in particular. It was March, cold still, and we'd had a good pot roast. Renee cleared the plates while Patrick leaned forward with that particular look he gets. Practiced concern, I came to think of it, and said, "Dorothy, we just want to make sure you're protected." Protected! That word, they used it a lot. I'm fine, I told him. I'm running a business, Patrick. I'm protected, just fine. We know you are, Renee said from the kitchen doorway. We just think, with the shop and the house and everything, it might be time to think about a power of attorney, just so someone can step in if you ever need help. I told them I'd think about it. I didn't think about it. I knew what thinking about it would lead to. But I also knew that saying a hard no would push things underground, and I wanted to see what they were really planning. So I nodded and smiled and refilled the coffee, and I watched. What I saw over the next several months was a slow and patient campaign. Renee started calling more often, always with some new concern. She'd read an article about elderly women being defrauded. She'd heard about a woman in her office whose mother had a fall and no one could access her accounts. She'd been talking to a lawyer friend about how simple and protective a power of attorney document could be. Every conversation was a brick in the same wall they were trying to build around me. And then there was my shop assistant, Beverly. Sweet Beverly, who had worked for me for 11 years. I noticed she started getting quiet whenever Renee came in. Stopped meeting my eye. One afternoon, I found her on the phone behind the storage room door, talking in a low voice. She stopped the moment she saw me. I didn't say anything then, but I started paying closer attention. It was a Tuesday in November when Renee called and asked if she could come by the shop after closing. Just the two of us. She wanted to talk about some things. She arrived with a manila folder. Inside was a power of attorney document, already drafted. It named Renee and Patrick as joint agents. It covered financial decisions, property decisions, and business decisions. It was comprehensive. It was thorough. Whoever had drafted it had done a careful job. "Mom," Renee said, and her voice had that practiced softness in it, the kind you use with someone you're afraid might shatter. "We just want to be able to help you if something happens. This doesn't change anything. You're still in charge of everything." I looked at the document for a long time. I looked at the signature line at the bottom with my name typed beneath it. "Can I hold on to this?" I asked. "I'd like to read it more carefully at home." She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Of course," she said. "Take all the time you need." I took it home. I read every word. And then, the next morning, before I opened the shop, I called a lawyer. Her name was Frances Okafor. A friend of mine from the library board had used her 2 years prior during a complicated estate matter and had said more than once that Frances was the kind of attorney who read everything twice and never made assumptions. That was exactly what I needed. I drove to her office on a Wednesday morning and sat across from her in a small conference room with plants on the windowsill and a cup of tea she'd offered me without my having to ask. I put the manila folder on the table between us. "My daughter gave me this," I said. "I want you to tell me what it actually means." Frances read it carefully. Quietly, she made a few small notes on a legal pad. When she looked up, her expression was measured. "This is a broad grant of authority," she said. "As written, your daughter and son-in-law could sell your property, access your accounts, and make decisions about your business without requiring your consent for each transaction. The language here is not unusual for this type of document, but it is extensive." "Could they sell my shop?" I asked. "As written, yes." "Could they sell my house?" "Yes." I sat with that for a moment. "What would you recommend?" I asked. Frances set down her pen. "I'd recommend we talk about what you actually want for your assets. And then I'd recommend we make sure that what you want is legally protected before anyone else gets involved." That was the beginning. Over the next 3 months, Frances and I worked carefully and quietly. I did not tell Renee. I did not tell Patrick. I did not change my behavior around them at all. I still had them over for Sunday dinners, still answered Renee's calls, still listened patiently to her concerns about my well-being. I smiled. I nodded. I said, "You're right. I really should think about getting that paperwork sorted." Meanwhile, Frances helped me establish a revocable living trust. Rosewood Blooms went into the trust. The house on Birchwood Lane went into the trust. My savings. Everything. The trust named me as the sole trustee for as long as I was living and competent, and Frances helped me document in careful detail exactly what competent meant and how it would be assessed, with requirements for independent medical evaluation, not simply a family member's say-so. I also updated my will, changed my durable power of attorney to name Frances herself as the agent with a trusted friend as backup. Not Renee, not Patrick. And then I waited. Renee called in February and asked if I'd had a chance to look at the documents she'd left with me. "I have," I said. "I'm almost ready to sign. Could you and Patrick come over on Saturday? I'll make dinner." She sounded pleased. Relieved almost. "Of course, Mom. We'll be there." They arrived Saturday evening with a bottle of wine and that particular brightness that people get when they think something is almost resolved in their favor. Patrick shook my hand warmly. Renee hugged me for a long time. We ate chicken and roasted vegetables and talked about small things. Their boat, the cold spring, a movie they'd seen. After dinner, Renee brought out her folder. "Set it on the table." "Are you ready?" she asked. "I am," I said. I signed the document she had given me. What Renee didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that the document was now essentially meaningless. Everything she and Patrick had expected to be able to access through that power of attorney was already held in a trust that they had no authority over. The shop, the house, the accounts, all of it. The signature she had just watched me put on that paper gave her authority over assets I no longer held in my personal name. She smiled and squeezed my hand and said, "I'm so glad we did this, Mom." So am I said. I meant it differently than she did. It took 4 months before they realized. In June, Renee called the bank to inquire about one of my accounts. The banker, who had known me for 15 years, told her that account was held in a trust and that she had no authority over it. Renee called me that evening, her voice carefully controlled. Mom, I was trying to help you consolidate some things and the bank said there's a trust. I didn't know about any trust. Oh yes, I said, keeping my voice light. I did that a few months ago. Francis, my attorney, helped me set it up. It just made sense to get organized. A pause. Your attorney? Francis Okafor. She's very good. You'd like her. Another pause. When did you get an attorney? I've always believed in having good professional advice, I said. Richard always said that. Renee showed up at the shop the next morning. She didn't look like herself. The careful calm she usually wore was gone, and underneath it was something raw. She stood across the counter from me and said, Mom, I need you to explain what's happening. Patrick and I have been trying to make sure you're protected, and now we're finding out you've moved everything into some trust we didn't know about. I set down the arrangement I was working on. Bird of paradise and white roses, a wedding order. The trust protects everything I own, I said, and ensures it passes exactly the way I want it to. And the power of attorney you signed covers very little, I said, because very little remains in my personal name. Francis explained it all to me. I'm happy to have her speak with you if you have questions. Renee stood very still. Patrick is going to want to talk about this, she said. I imagine he will, I said. But Renee, there's nothing to talk about. These are my assets. My house, my business, my savings. I built all of it. Your father and I built all of it. And I have arranged things exactly as I want them arranged. That is not going to change. She left without buying anything. What happened next was the part that truly showed me who they had decided to be. Patrick sent me a letter, an actual letter, typed on his firm's letterhead, suggesting that my sudden and uncharacteristic legal activity indicated that I might be experiencing cognitive decline and recommending that the family pursue a competency evaluation. He had attached information about legal guardianship proceedings. I read that letter 3 times. I felt the particular cold of it, the clinical language wrapped around what was, underneath, a threat. I called Frances the same day. She was not surprised. She told me this was not uncommon, that when financial plans are unexpectedly blocked, some families escalate. She told me she had seen it before. She also told me that because we had anticipated this possibility, we had documentation, medical records showing consistent, strong cognitive function, a record of my business activity, my financial decisions, my participation in the trust formation, a letter from my physician, all of it dated, all of it thorough, all of it assembled quietly over the months while I was smiling at Sunday dinners. They will not succeed, Francis told me, because you have been very careful. There was a brief legal proceeding. Patrick and Renee petitioned for a competency evaluation. The court ordered one. I sat across from a neuropsychologist for 2 hours on a Tuesday afternoon, answered every question, completed every task, and at the end of it, the evaluator shook my hand and said it had been a pleasure. The court found no basis for guardianship proceedings. The petition was dismissed. Francis called me when the decision came through, and I was standing in the back of my shop, surrounded by stems and petals and the good green smell of fresh flowers, and I had to sit down for a minute because my legs went a little weak with the relief of it. Patrick and Renee did not come to Sunday dinner after that. Renee sent one email, brief and cool, saying she needed time to process everything. I wrote back that I understood, that I loved her, and that my door was always open. I meant that too. Beverly, my shop assistant, came to me about 2 weeks after the court decision. She had clearly been working up to it for some time. She stood in the back room with her hands clasped and told me that several months earlier, Renee had asked her to let her know if I seemed confused, if I made unusual business decisions, if anything seemed off. Beverly had agreed, she said, because she thought Renee was genuinely worried about me. I never told her anything bad, Beverly said, because there wasn't anything bad to tell. But I should have told you. I looked at her for a long moment. 11 years. She had been with me through the flood, through the recession, through Richard's funeral, when I had come back to the shop after the reception because I needed somewhere to put my hands. "I know," I said. I figured. She looked like she might cry. "Beverly," I said, "you're not a bad person. You were used by someone who should have known better." "That's not the same thing." I kept her on. "I meant that too. It has been 14 months now since the court dismissed Patrick's petition. Rosewood Blooms is still on Elm Street. The roses are coming in well this spring. We have a big order for a hospital fundraiser, all white and yellow. And I've been in early every morning to get the prep work done. I still beat Carol at Scrabble, though she's gotten better lately, and I have to pay attention. My granddaughter, Renee's youngest, called me last month out of the blue. She's 23 and studying environmental law in Portland. We talked for an hour and a half. She reminded me of her grandmother, of me, I suppose, in certain ways. Careful, observant. Not quick to speak, but sure of herself when she does. Renee and I have spoken 3 times since everything settled. It is careful, the way it is now. Not broken, but not what it was. I don't know yet what it will become. I hope for something. I hold that hope gently. The way you hold a stem, you're not sure whether to cut. What I know is this. I built a life. Richard and I built it together, and then I carried it forward alone, and it is mine, not because I am selfish, not because I don't love my family, but because the years I spent building it, the early mornings, the hard seasons, the particular grief of continuing after Richard was gone, those years belong to me. What they produced belongs to me. No one gets to decide when a woman is finished. No one gets to look at 69 years of living and call it a liability. I signed their paper. I smiled at their dinner table. I let them think they had won. And then I lived my life on my own terms, the same way I always have. If you are a woman of a certain age and someone is circling you with their concern and their paperwork and their practiced expressions of worry, listen to what I'm telling you. Get an attorney. Get your documents in order. Do it quietly and do it first. The roses don't ask permission to bloom. Neither do I. I've thought a lot about what Renee and Patrick were counting on. Not just legally. I mean what they believed about me deep down that made them think this would work. They believed I was tired. That a woman who had buried her husband, who had gray hair and reading glasses and a flower shop on a small street in a small town, was someone whose best thinking was already behind her. They believed that age softens a person into someone who can be managed. And I think that belief, that particular quiet condescension, was the real seed of everything that followed. Not greed alone, not malice alone, but the assumption that I was no longer fully in the room. That assumption cost them everything they were reaching for. I don't say that with any satisfaction about their loss. I say it because I think it's important to understand what actually happened here. Renee and Patrick didn't fail because the world punished them. They failed because the plan they built was constructed on a false foundation, a version of me that didn't exist. They planned for a woman who would defer, who would be reassured by kind language and practice concern, who would sign what was put in front of her and be grateful someone was taking charge. And so when I turned out to be something different, there was nothing for their plan to stand on. That is how choices work. Not in some mystical, cosmic sense, just in the plain, practical sense that what you do determines what becomes possible. Renee chose, month after month, to move towards something that was not hers. Each visit, each careful conversation, each brick in that wall of concern, those were choices, and each choice narrowed what could come next. By the time she sat at my kitchen table and watched me sign, she had already decided who she was in the story. I hadn't made that decision for her. What I chose was different. I chose to pay attention when most people would have wanted to look away. I chose to walk into Francis's office, even when part of me hoped I was wrong about what I was seeing. I chose to prepare quietly instead of confront loudly because I understood something Renee didn't, that the strongest position is the one you've already secured before anyone knows you're building it. That's not cleverness. That's what a lifetime of running a business teaches you. You don't wait for the flood to fix the drainage. You don't wait for the hard season to build the reserves. You pay attention. You make your decisions before they're urgent, and you keep your own counsel. The intelligence it takes to protect yourself is not complicated. It is mostly just the willingness to see things clearly and act on what you see, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the person you're seeing clearly is someone you love. And the courage, because it does take courage to trust yourself more than you trust the comfort of pretending everything is fine. I am 69 years old. I have a flower shop, a house, a savings account, a lawyer I trust, and a granddaughter I talked to for an hour and a half last month who reminded me that some things carry forward in ways you don't expect. Rosewood Blooms opens at 8 o'clock every morning. The roses are coming in well this spring. I am still fully in the room.